Ryan Day and the Ohio State Buckeyes continue to make the right moves in 2024.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, your boy is back. After being away for a week on the island of the Bahamas, we're back and better than ever. And when I got back into the States, I realized Ryan Day is still on this trajectory and path to make Ohio State a lot better in 2024. Welcome in, Buckeye fans, to a Monday edition of Locked On Buckeyes here on Monday, January 22nd in the year 2024. I am your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Man, oh man, it feels good to be back with you here on this podcast on a fabulous Monday in the first month of 2024. When I got back into the States on Friday, didn't have Wi-Fi, no connection while I was away with my woman celebrating our honeymoon, I realized Ohio State still is on this same path that they have been on to make this team a whole lot better. Ryan Day and Ohio State hired Bill O'Brien to be the offensive coordinator and quarterback coach in Columbus, which makes me believe he's going to call the offensive plays as well. Also got a big-time transfer in Caleb Downs, another one, the second one from the Crimson Tide, former safety, 100-plus tackles a year ago in Alabama. It's now going to be the guy in Columbus. Hey, stay on this path, Ryan Day. Continue what you're doing right now. Continue making these moves that are making the roster better, because if that continues, the Buckeyes will make some big noise, some good noise in the fall. Trust me, y'all know I have been on here on this show in the offseason, voicing my frustration, voicing my disapproval with some of the things that have been going on in Columbus in regards to the football team. I did not expect to come back here on this show on Monday and to realize, hey, Ryan Day, he's a man on a mission, and the mission is not one he is getting away from. Make news and make noise that's going to make people think, hey, watch out for those Buckeyes in the fall. Now, it's not just people thinking and saying it. There's substance to it. You bring in a guy like Caleb Downs, 100-plus tackles a year ago as a true freshman at Alabama. I believe he led the Crimson Tide in tackles. I believe also he's the only Crimson Tide player to have over 100-plus tackles in this past season. So that's a big thing to say about this young man as well. He's going to be an instant guy that's going to come in and start right away. You lose Josh Proctor, in come Caleb Downs, who I believe is better than Proctor. So what are you doing? You're filling a hole with the guy that's going to come in and do it right away, keep your defensive backfield at the same level, or maybe take it to another level. Hey, that's great for Caleb Downs. You bring in a guy like Bill O'Brien. Now, some people might say, Bill O'Brien, not the guy. Bill O'Brien had issues in New England. Bill O'Brien had issues in Alabama. Might I remind you, he did have a Heisman Trophy winner in Bryce Young that was in the room he was leading, not just the offensive room, but the quarterback room as well. So I would say, hey, hold on. I don't think Ryan Day would bring Bill O'Brien in if he did not, one, trust him in his offensive mind, that he did not trust and look into the track record of what Bill O'Brien has done, not only in college football at Alabama most recently, but also as the head coach of the Houston Texans. Later on in the show, we're going to talk to Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC to hear about what his thoughts are about Caleb Downs, a player, and also what Bill O'Brien has done in college football and in the NFL to make him a well-respected offensive mind and quarterback coach. But also in this offseason, I'm going to go through a list here to talk about just some of the moves Ryan Day has made. Corey Dennis no longer the quarterback coach. He is still going to be on the coaching staff, just in a different role. Perry Eliano, former safety coach, has been let go. Maybe there were some misses in recruiting. Who do they go out there and get? A guy that was formerly at Ohio State, and also a guy that used to coach with Jim Knowles at Duke, and Matt Guerrieri. I believe I got the name correct there. Hey, I got to give a shout out to Berm of the podcast and Rivals, because, hey, He said it a few times, and I was like, oh, that's how you say it. And then when I heard it a couple times, started practicing it myself, and here we are. You're bringing Matt Guerrieri for safeties and to coach that room, that's great. But you're bringing in Will Howard, starting quarterback. You're bringing in Quinshon Judkins, another running back. You're bringing in Seth McLaughlin, starting center. You're bringing in Will Kekmarik, transfer from Ohio, the Bobcats, who I think will be and should be the starting tight end at Ohio State. Look, I know some of y'all are listening right now saying, is this man literally clapping audibly into a microphone on the show? Absolutely. Why? Because I am pleased with what Ryan Day has done so far this offseason. And I know that people don't agree with the thoughts I have or the analysis that I provide about Ryan Day. Who cares? I don't care if you agree or disagree with what I got to say. Really don't care. Doesn't change my thoughts at all. But what does change my thoughts is what we have seen this offseason. Ryan Day realizes that I compare what Ryan Day is doing right now to an NBA player or NFL player who is in a contract year, or any professional athlete. You know, if you're in a contract year, what are you going to do? Play the best you have ever played in your life. Think about guys in the NBA. I hear a lot about it. Hey, he's in a contract year. Oh, man. Watch out now. He might drop 20 points in a 20 points, 5 games in a row, and all of a sudden might spark something for him to get that payday at the end of the season, maybe end the season on the same team that he's in. Or, hey, let's say he gets traded, but you still keep boosting your stock because of the way you're playing on that basketball court. Look, this is how I feel about Ryan Day right now. And it's not a bad thing that he is viewing this like it's a contract year for him. Many people believe if it's 11-0 and you lose to Michigan Thanksgiving weekend in 2024, he's gone. Many people believe that. And you know what? With that thought in mind, it's not just that thought. It's that, hey, maybe things that I have done previously have not been good enough to get the Buckeyes to where we want to be. I've said it once, I'll say it again, and I know it'll come from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center as well. Hey, I don't make the standard. The standard has been set by the players and the coaches that are part of this team. First goal every year, beat the team up north. Second goal every year, win the Big Ten Conference Championship. Third goal every year, to win the national championship. Over the past 3 years, none of those goals have been accomplished. Now, in 2020, there was no game against Michigan, so you couldn't say, hey, they didn't accomplish that goal. Well, there was no game, so that was not a goal that could have been accomplished if that game was not played. You do win the Big Ten Conference Championship in 2020, and you gave yourself a shot to win the Natty. Great. 2019, 2018, what happened? You all saw under Urban. You beat Michigan. There's a good chance you're going to win the Big Ten Conference Championship. Didn't happen every year, but there's a realistic shot that you will do that thing, or at least be in that game. But also, you do those two things, you're going to have a realistic opportunity to win the national championship. Hey, I don't set the standard. I'm just here to relay the standard that's come from inside the football program at the Ohio State University. And with that thought in mind, with the hiring of Bill O'Brien, with the lesser role for Corey Dennis, with the removal of Perry Eliano, with the hiring of Matt Guerrieri, bringing in Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, Seth McLaughlin, Will Kekmarik, and Caleb Downs, I do believe Ryan Day is saying, look, this ain't just a contract year. This is a year where I am trying to show everybody in college football that I am going to make the moves to make Ohio State better in 2024, but also so the Buckeyes can have a realistic shot to beat Michigan, win the Big Ten Conference Championship for the first time since 2020, but then also to win the national championship, which would be the first time Ryan Day would win it in his tenure as head coach at Ohio State. It's a big ask. It's a lot on the table. But when you make moves like this, that goal, reaching one or reaching all three, they're more realistic. Coming up next, Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC will be joining us to talk about the transfer of Caleb Downs, the hiring of Bill O'Brien, Seth McLaughlin, and also Quinshon Judkins. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, We are in the midst of the NFL postseason. And if you're looking for a way to get in on the postseason action, do it with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you simply place a $5 bet. Guys, it's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. Find bet in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find popular parlays and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Ohio State's had a lot of guys transfer over the past couple of weeks, but one might not be bigger than Caleb Downs, who transferred from Alabama to Ohio State. Here with us to talk about Caleb Downs and other former Alabama Crimson Tide players and a former coach is Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC. And Chris, before we get to Bill O'Brien, which was big news as well, Caleb Downs is huge. This is a guy who I believe is going to be an instant impact player for the Buckeyes. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this kid was everything advertised and then some this past year for Alabama as a freshman. We had heard rumblings throughout last spring, this was going to be, this is one of their premier additions. But every year with Alabama, you never know. I mean, they always have 5 stars at every position. So, sometimes there's a log jam. Sometimes there's guys who step up and make an immediate impact. And Caleb Downs is one of those guys. I remember watching the Alabama spring game and seeing him hitting. And I think he had an interception in that game, I want to say. And it was like, okay, this kid's going to play right away. And sure enough, he did. Alabama opened the season with, Middle Tennessee State. And I want to say he had like 8 tackles in that one. And then going on the road to Texas, double-digit tackles in that one, a forced fumble. Just was an immediate impact player. And then, as the season went along, he had interceptions against in the Mississippi State game, against A&M, which was a 1-score game. So, it was just an immediate impact guy. And, not just, when you play the safety spot, sometimes there's guys who are the free roamers back there. Sometimes there's the guys who can come up and play the line of scrimmage. They might call him a box safety or whatever, but Caleb Downs can kind of do it all. Like, he can drop into coverage. He can come up and play the run. I mean, he can kind of do it all for you. So I'll be curious to see how Ohio State uses him, because Alabama kind of used him in a multiple of different positions. But, just a really, really elite player for being just a freshman. I remember Nick Saban and some of the coaching staff saying this kid doesn't play like a freshman. He plays like a veteran that's been around a while. And so, yeah, when he entered the portal, I mean, I think a lot of people thought, I talked to a couple of people like Georgia who thought it was almost a surefire deal that he was coming to Georgia. And obviously Travaris Robinson, was the defensive backs coach at Alabama, had helped recruit him. And they had a really close tie. And Georgia just a week ago steals him away and makes him their co-defensive coordinator right after Nick Saban retires. And so the writing was on the wall. It just felt like Caleb Downs going to Georgia was a surefire get. But, I kept hearing Ohio State's still in this. Ohio State's still making a push for him. And when he made the move, I said, wow, that is just a huge, huge get for Ohio State and that defense. As they make some changes there, I think Caleb Downs is going to be an impact player, from day one in Columbus.
You're talking about him in a way that he doesn't sound like a freshman at all. And you said that earlier on, that he didn't really play like a freshman, didn't seem like one. And the coaches kind of said the same thing to you, probably multiple coaches as well. That's one thing that Ohio State, I believe, in the portal, they're trying to go out there and get not just guys that can be instant impact players, but also guys that don't play like young college football players that maybe they started before, but they still have a little growing up to do, or just figuring out of the football itself. Downs, it sounds like he is a guy that plays like a veteran and play like that as a freshman, and that type of mentality and being able to play that way is something that Ohio State desperately needs at the safety position. You lose Josh Proctor out of eligibility. He's gone to the NFL. In comes Caleb Downs, instantly fills that role, and also brings a level of experience in the SEC, 100-plus tackles last year, and a guy that I believe can be very versatile and be used in different ways between him and Lathan Ransom next year. It's kind of a guy that you need at your safety position.
Yeah, and I think Ohio State, they had recruited pretty well, and you had guys like Hartford and Brenton
Yeah,
Jones. But I
yeah.
just thought that, if you could go get an immediate impact player there, obviously, Caleb Downs is that guy. And I talked about his versatility. I loved watching him in coverage. At times he could be that ball hawk
Yeah.
safety, but he could also play the boundary. If you go back and watch the film against Georgia in the SEC championship game, some of those receivers he was asked to cover one-on-one out of the boundaries. And I mean, just playing underneath, playing the ball, incredible skills like that. Against LSU, I want to say that was, he had like 13 tackles that season or that game. And you talk about what LSU did that game with Jaden Daniels running as much as he did with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., those great receivers that they have. Caleb Downs was everywhere and anywhere. And, they made some big plays there in the fourth quarter to end up knocking Jaden Daniels out of the game, but Caleb Downs was just everywhere in that game. So, yeah, it's, again, just a tremendous player that, Ohio State fans should absolutely be celebrating getting a guy like this because when you talk about, being physical, right? Michigan was so physical this year,
Right,
running the football the way they did. You got to have some guys who aren't afraid to get their hands on a receiver or come up and help stop the run. And Caleb Downs will do all of that.
Chris, I think about Downs. You talk about all the things that he does so well. What are some things he needs to work on this year?
Yeah, I just think continue to be a complete safety. If they see him as free safety in the NFL at the next level, is that all the skill set that it takes to cover guys well, and then all the different schemes. Obviously, in the NFL they run so many different multiple DB sets, and so do you work in a cover two? All that kind of stuff. So I think. It's just a guy who can be an immediate leader for Ohio State this coming season and really help be a leader of that defense, albeit whatever he is, 19, 20 years old. So, probably maybe a little bit more in the coverage skills, play recognition, that sort of thing. But, that kind of comes with the territory. But like I said, a big loss for Alabama. And I know they never hit the panic button in Tuscaloosa, but man, with all the pieces they've lost the last 2 weeks, Kalen DeBoer could be a really good coach, but we may not get a chance to know it because of all the guys who jumped ship immediately.
You're correct there. One guy that left Alabama, not really jumping ship, but just going to a different role, was Bill O'Brien. He was at Alabama in 2021 and 2022 as the offensive coordinator / quarterback coach for those couple of years. Went back to the NFL, worked for the Patriots this past year, and then he's now back in college football in Columbus. When you heard that Ohio State was hiring Bill O'Brien to be their offensive coordinator and QB coach, what went through your mind?
Well, I think a lot of people, it kind of became a punchline. Like the name Bill O'Brien kind of became a punchline in recent years. I will say this: I'm a little bit closer to the situation because I'm here in Houston and I cover the Houston Texans with my radio station, and so I've been around Bill O'Brien a ton. He did a really good job in Houston. You talk about him going as an assistant from, I remember the early days when I first heard his name. He was the guy, the OC in New England at Tom Brady. He was getting a shouting match with Tom Brady. And it was kind of funny, like, whoa, who's that guy? Then he goes to Penn State amid all the Sandusky, Joe Paterno aftermath and did a good job of getting them back on track. I mean, that whole thing was ready to crumble and Bill O'Brien did a good job. And so I had some people tell me at the time, Bill O'Brien's he's a good college coach, but his dream is still the NFL and he wants to be back in the NFL. And so, fast forward, he becomes the head coach of the Houston Texans. They end up drafting Deshaun Watson. The first few years before Deshaun Watson, he actually did a good job. It was a revolving door quarterback. They had Brian Hoyer. They had Ryan Mallett. They had Ryan Fitzpatrick. What's the guy? Osweiler. They had all these quarterbacks, and then eventually they hit on Deshaun Watson. But what all these things had in common? Bill O'Brien ran successful offenses with all those guys and made the playoffs and won the AFC South a handful of times. And so, we weren't necessarily calling him a quarterback whisperer, but he had schemes that worked. And when he got Deshaun Watson, man, it all came together and really clicked. Now, everything fell apart that last year with Watson, and it wasn't really the offense. The offense was fine. They were scoring a ton of points. It was just kind of a collective, everything behind the scenes falling apart. So, he's looking for a redemption. And so he goes to Tuscaloosa and joins Nick Saban. And man, I'll say this. I thought he did a pretty good job running that offense at Alabama. Alabama, in the history of think about Alabama football and all their great history. They never had a Heisman winning quarterback before Bryce Young. And Bill O'Brien was his coach and calling the play. So, everybody in Tuscaloosa can poo-poo them all they want. There were things like where they would get first and goal from the 4 and they would throw the ball and it's incomplete or get picked off. That's where Alabama fans would get a gripe because they're like, no, we're used to running the football. And that's, old school mentality. Bill O'Brien does want to run the football and will run it well. And obviously bringing Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss,
man.
they're going to do that very well. But those were kind of the gripes. There was never like, man, Bill O'Brien sucks. We only have 200 yards of offense today. It was never like that. It was just some of the decision making, like why are we throwing when we should be running and stuff like that. But yeah, I think as a college coach, I think, again, the offenses there were very successful in Alabama. Look at Bryce Young in his rookie year in the NFL. He looks like a complete flop. Well, he looked like the best quarterback in college football for 2 years at Alabama with Bill O'Brien calling plays. So, look, it didn't work out in New England this year, and that's why it becomes even more of a punchline. People want to go, oh, Bill O'Brien, he sucks. Yeah, it was doomed from the get-go there with the quarterback situation, everything they had going there in New England. Obviously, Bill Belichick on the way out the door. So, but I do think Bill O'Brien can be a really good offensive mind in the college game, and I think Ryan Day kind of trusts him to go. And Ryan Day may still be involved a little bit, right? I mean, they'll put the game plans together and all that, but as a game day play caller in college football, I think Bill O'Brien's still a really, really good coach. And so, yeah, I think you'll hear a lot of negativity from people nationally, but if you're an Ohio State fan, you got to kind of look through that and go look at the numbers and go look at what Bill O'Brien actually did in his time in Tuscaloosa with all that 4- and 5-star talent. Turns out he's a pretty damn good coach.
Chris, there's one thing you talk about here, well, a couple of them, him being a good coach, him being a good play caller, but also the Bryce Young effect. And that's one thing Ohio State fans are really hoping for, is that whoever coaches the quarterbacks full time is going to do something with the quarterback position that they didn't have this year. Now, remember, we had Stroud, there was Fields for 4 years together. That's a really good stretch of quarterback play. You got Haskins, you got Barrett. Like, Ohio State got spoiled with quarterbacks. McCord's not a bad quarterback. It's just things didn't go his way consistently for Ryan Day to be all in on McCord in the upcoming season this year. I do think, though, with Bill O'Brien, the offensive play calling, I don't think he would have been hired if Day didn't trust him with calling the offensive plays. But also his track record with quarterbacks, I think that goes hand in hand with how much trust Ryan Day has in Bill O'Brien for the upcoming season and what the offense might be with Bill O'Brien calling the plays and leading the quarterback room.
Yeah, it's funny. I think Ryan Day might have been a little bit spoiled with C.J. Stroud. We're starting to see how good Stroud really was, and maybe he didn't have to spend as much time with him. And then you get Kyle McCord, and you expect, kind of be the same thing, and it wasn't. He's a guy who obviously needed a little bit more caring and one-on-one and that kind of stuff. And we didn't see it come to fruition this year, but yeah, just having O'Brien, another voice in the room, is going to help. Day. Defer and not have to spend all that time one-on-one with the quarterback and molding and that sort of thing. And Bill O'Brien can do that. And, 2 years ago with that season with Bryce Young at Alabama, where they lost 2 games, I go back to that season, their first loss was to, I believe it was Tennessee. It was either LSU or Tennessee. I forget the order, but the loss at Tennessee, they're in Knoxville in a shootout with Hendon Hooker, and the game is coming down to the wire. Their kicker, Will Riker, never misses a kick, misses one, and Tennessee gets the ball back. They go down. They kick the game winner. It wasn't the offense's fault. It wasn't Bill O'Brien's fault. And then the loss in Baton Rouge to LSU, they get the ball. They force overtime. They go down the field to score, force overtime. They go to overtime, get the ball first, go down and score, take the lead. LSU answers. They score and go for 2 and get the win there. Bill O'Brien had nothing to do with either of those losses. He's looking at Nick Saban going, offense did our job. Bryce Young was fantastic. And then they go on to beat the hell out of, Kansas State in the Sugar Bowl. And, you look back on a season that what could have been, Bama probably should have been undefeated and playing for a national championship that year, and they probably would have won one. So, it's just funny. I look back on that year and, for everything that Bama fans wanted to blame and pointing fingers at Pete Golding, the DC, or Bill O'Brien as the OC. Bill O'Brien was fantastic as an OC. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see him with Will Howard. Obviously, we saw some nice glimpses of what Will Howard could do, and now it's also sounding like Julian Sayin is going to, a guy that Bill O'Brien was helping recruit when he was at Alabama, and then ultimately he committed there, and then Bill O'Brien to England. But yeah, I mean, I think those ties might help there in bringing Sayin to Columbus.
Last thing here for you, Chris. I wish you had more time. I want to touch on more players, but there were a lot of Ohio State fans that had mixed emotions when they heard that Seth McLaughlin, the former Alabama center, transferred to Ohio State. They all remember the final play in the Rose Bowl, saw some of the issues that happened in the Rose Bowl, snapping the ball. I don't think Ryan Day, Justin Fry, any of the offensive coaches would have pursued McLaughlin if they didn't think he was going to be a guy that could make the offensive line better in Columbus. When you watch this guy play, what do you see?
Well, look, he's a big-time SEC offensive lineman. 6'4", over 300 pounds. He's physical. He's tough. For whatever reason, they weren't able to make it work. The connection with him and Milroe, really the whole offensive line as a whole in Alabama it was a hodgepodge, and it was weird all year long. Like, there were games where they played absolutely lights out against Kentucky and against LSU. And then there were games where they just looked like a befuddled mess. And you're going, what is going on here? We're used to Alabama having this brick wall. I don't know. Whatever it was, whatever the reason, and I guess it was, first-year starter and Jalen Milroe who gets benched and then comes back in. Him and McLaughlin just kind of had snap issues all season long. And so, McLaughlin took the brunt of it. I think some of it was on Milroe. I think some of it was on a new play caller, Tommy Reese. I mean, there was a whole lot of things that went into it, but ultimately, this is still a really good offensive lineman from the state of Georgia. And, look, they'll have all offseason to get it going. Obviously, he'll be working with a new quarterback. But if it is Will Howard as the starter at Ohio State and Seth snapping them the ball, again, you got some great running backs to turn around and hand the ball off to, and Quinshon Judkins and obviously Henderson. So we'll see, we'll see what happens. But, yeah, I expect him to come in, lock down that center job. And, are there some concerns there and how, so a couple moments played out, particularly in the playoffs, sure. But I think he'll fix all that. Again, he's a guy who's played many years in college football. I think he'll be just fine.
Chris, you mentioned Judkins a couple of times. I want to add this in just about 30, 45 seconds. Just your thought on what kind of player Judkins is.
He's a stud. I mean, he was the best running back in the SEC 2 years ago. And, for whatever reason, they had trouble getting him going early on this year. And as the year went along, he got going. And we saw those glimpses of what he looked like the year prior. So it's a big loss for Ole Miss. I'm surprised. NIL played a big part of it. They couldn't pay him what they wanted to pay him because they'd already paid out a ton of money to other guys. And then there's some issues behind the scenes with getting into it with some players and coaches, whatever. That happens with 19, 20-year-olds. I'm not too concerned about that. But if he's coming to Ohio State, look, he knows he wants to be part of a winner and thinks he has a chance to win a championship there. And I think he'll probably be the leading rusher in the Big Ten when it's all said and done. I get it. He's going to split time. But man, he's so special with the ball in his hands. I think he'll be right there.
Really appreciate Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC coming on the show to talk about Caleb Downs, Bill O'Brien, Seth McLaughlin, and also Quinshon Judkins at the end. Follow Chris Gordy at Chris Gordy on X. Also, check out Locked On SEC. Has a lot of good stuff covering the Southeastern Conference. You can follow me on X as well at JStevens07. This has been Locked On Buckeyes here on a Monday. I'll see you next time.